I'll never forget the moment I opened my laptop in that sterile hotel room in Portland, Oregon, and watched strangers destroying my life in real time through hidden cameras I'd installed in my own home. What I discovered that night would expose a family betrayal so twisted, so calculated, that it would shatter everything I thought I knew about the people who raised me. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my family turned my house into their personal cash machine, and how I caught them in the act. It started 3 weeks ago when I returned from a business trip to find my neighbor standing in his driveway, staring at my house like it had personally offended him. Tom Bradley was the kind of neighbor you nod to but never really talk to, retired military. Perfectly manicured lawn, the type who probably organized his garage by paint color. But that Tuesday morning in September, he looked genuinely disturbed. "Sarah," he called out, as I wrestled my suitcase from the trunk of my car, "we need to talk." I'd been gone for 10 days, consulting for a tech startup in Seattle. All I wanted was a hot shower and my own bed. The last thing I needed was a neighbor complaint about my sprinklers or my mail piling up. "What's wrong, Tom?" He glanced around like he was checking for eavesdroppers, then stepped closer. "There's been activity at your house while you were gone." My blood went cold. What kind of activity? Cars coming and going at all hours, loud music, and Sarah. He paused, looking genuinely uncomfortable. There was screaming. My wife thought someone was being hurt. We almost called the police twice. I stared at him. "That's impossible. I've been in Seattle for 10 days. The house was empty." Tom's expression shifted from concern to something that looked almost like pity. "Sarah, honey, I saw people going in and out of your house every night. Different people, sometimes 5 or 6 cars in your driveway at once. The world tilted sideways. Different people. And the screaming wasn't normal screaming. It was," he struggled for words. "It sounded like someone was in serious pain, or serious distress. I felt like I was drowning in broad daylight." "Tom, are you absolutely sure it was coming from my house?" "Positive. The music would start around 9 p.m. Then the cars would arrive. By midnight, it sounded like something I shouldn't be hearing through my bedroom window." I thanked Tom and practically ran to my front door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. Inside, the house looked perfect. Too perfect. My coffee table had been moved slightly to the left. The couch cushions were fluffed in a way I never bothered with. There was a faint smell in the air, not bad, just unfamiliar, like expensive candles and something else I couldn't identify. But what made my stomach drop was what I found in my bedroom. My sheets were different. Not completely different, same color, same brand, but the thread count was higher. Someone had replaced my bedding with more expensive versions and apparently thought I wouldn't notice. In my bathroom, there were toiletries I'd never bought, high-end products tucked behind my regular drugstore shampoo, a tube of mascara that cost more than I typically spent on makeup in a month. Someone had been living in my house, and they'd been living better than I did. I called the only people who had keys to my house, my parents. "Oh, sweetheart." My mother's voice was bright, almost giddy. "How was Seattle? Did you close the deal, Mom? Were you at my house while I was gone? Just to water your plants, honey? You know how I worry about those poor things dying. Did you stay over?" A pause. "Well, just one night. The drive from Beaverton is so long, and your father's back has been acting up. We thought you wouldn't mind." Beaverton was 45 minutes away, hardly a cross-country journey. "Mom," Tom said, "there were multiple cars in my driveway every night. Loud music. Screaming." Another pause, longer this time. "Oh, that. Well, you know how sound carries in that neighborhood. Probably came from somewhere else, Mom." "Sarah, honey, we can explain everything. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? Your father is making his famous chili." She hung up before I could respond. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. I kept imagining strangers walking through my hallway, using my bathroom, sleeping in my bed. The violation felt physical, like someone had been living under my skin. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I drove to the electronics store and spent $800 on a security camera system. Not the basic kind you get at Target, professional-grade cameras with night vision, motion detection, and live streaming capabilities. If my family was going to use my house as their personal hotel, I was going to find out exactly what they were doing there. The installation took me all day, I hid cameras in 6 different locations: living room, kitchen, master bedroom, guest room, hallway, and garage, all connected to an app on my phone that would send me alerts the moment anyone entered the house. Then I waited. My next business trip was already scheduled 3 days in Portland for a software implementation. I told my parents about it during that awkward dinner, watching their faces carefully when I mentioned the dates. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother said, but I caught the quick glance she exchanged with my father. "We should probably check on the house while you're gone. You know, for security." "That's not necessary," I said. "I've got it covered." Nonsense. Family takes care of family. If you're already hooked by this twisted family secret, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Trust me, what I discovered on those cameras will shock you to your core. And drop a comment if you've ever had family members who seemed a little too interested in your personal space. 2 days later, I was sitting in my hotel room in Portland when my phone started buzzing with motion alerts. It was 7:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. I opened the app and nearly dropped my phone. My mother was unlocking my front door, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a woman I'd never seen before, tall, elegant, probably in her 50s, carrying what looked like an expensive overnight bag. "Welcome to Sarah's place," I heard my mother say through the audio feed. "I think you'll find it very accommodating." The stranger smiled and stepped inside. At 10:30 p.m., I watched my father stand up in the middle of my living room and address the group of strangers like he was hosting a corporate retreat. "Welcome, everyone, to another evening at Sarah's sanctuary," he said, with the kind of confidence that made my skin crawl. "As always, discretion is our highest priority." The group murmured agreement. I counted 12 people total, not including my parents, all well-dressed, all middle-aged, all treating my house like their private club. A woman with perfectly styled gray hair raised her hand. "Robert, before we begin, I want to confirm the new security measures. My husband is running for city council, and we cannot afford any complications." My father nodded gravely. "Of course, Patricia. As I mentioned in my email, we've implemented a new screening process. Everyone here tonight has been personally vouched for by existing members. No exceptions." "Members?" "They had members. Another man, wearing what looked like a $2,000 suit, spoke up. "And the payments?" "The new structure." "Ah, yes," my father replied, pulling out a small notebook. "Given the increasing demand for Sarah's space, we've had to adjust our rates. Single evening experiences are now $800 per person. Weekend packages are $2,200. Monthly memberships are $5,500 with unlimited access." I nearly threw up in my hotel room. They were charging people to use my house. My parents had turned my home into a business, and they were making thousands of dollars a month off it. My mother stood up next, and what she said made my blood freeze. "Now, as many of you know, Sarah is completely unaware of our arrangement. She believes we're simply house-sitting while she travels. It's absolutely crucial that we maintain this fiction." The elegant woman from earlier, the one who'd paid cash, laughed softly. "Poor thing. She has no idea she's funding her own parents' retirement." The group laughed. Actually laughed. They thought it was funny that they were violating my home, my privacy, my trust. But then my father said something that made me realize this was worse than I'd imagined. "Friends, I want to remind everyone that what happens in Sarah's house stays in Sarah's house. We've all signed the discretion agreements, and we've all paid the insurance premiums. This is a safe space for all of us to explore aspects of ourselves that the outside world might not understand." Insurance premiums. Discretion agreements. This wasn't just about money. They'd created an entire business infrastructure around my house. A younger woman, maybe in her early 40s, raised her hand. "Robert, I want to thank you and Linda for creating this space. My marriage was falling apart before I found this community. Having a place where my husband and I can reconnect without judgment has been life-changing." Other people started chiming in with similar testimonials. They talked about finding themselves, about authentic connection, about breaking free from societal constraints. They made it sound like my house was some kind of spiritual retreat center. But then the conversation took a darker turn. "What about the neighbor situation?" asked the man in the expensive suit. Patricia mentioned there were some close calls. "Last month," my mother waved dismissively. "Tom Bradley is harmless. He's complained a few times about noise, but Sarah handled it. She told him she was having some friends over for wine nights. He bought it completely." My father nodded. The key is managing Sarah's perception. As long as she thinks the neighbors are exaggerating or mistaken, we can continue operating safely. They'd been using me to cover their tracks. When neighbors complained about noise or suspicious activity, my parents would tell me about it in a way that made me dismiss their concerns. They'd weaponized my trust in them against my own interests. But what happened next revealed the true scope of their deception. My mother pulled out a laptop and opened what looked like a spreadsheet. "Let's review this month's numbers," she said. We had 18 single-night bookings at $800 each. That's $14,400. 5 weekend packages at $2,200. Each brings us to $25,400. And we have 7 monthly members at $5,500 each, which adds $38,500. I did the math in my head. They were making nearly $80,000 a month using my house. Almost $1 million a year, after expenses, cleaning, insurance, supplies, and the 20% we're setting aside for Sarah's eventual discovery. We're looking at about $55,000 in profit. This month, my father continued. The 20% they were setting aside for my eventual discovery, they knew I'd find out eventually, and they were already planning how to handle it financially. A woman I hadn't noticed before spoke up from the back of the room. "Speaking of Sarah's discovery, what's our timeline? How long can we realistically continue before she becomes suspicious?" My parents exchanged a look that chilled me to the bone. "We estimate another 18 months, possibly 2 years. My mother said calmly. "Sarah's travel schedule is becoming more demanding, which works in our favor. And frankly, she's so trusting that we could probably continue indefinitely if we're careful. But what if she does find out early?" The woman pressed. My father's smile was cold and calculating. "Sarah values family above everything else. Even if she discovered our operation, she'd never do anything to truly hurt us. We raised her to prioritize family loyalty over personal grievances." The room murmured agreement, and I realized they'd been counting on my love for them to protect them from consequences. They'd built their entire criminal enterprise on the assumption that I was too weak, too devoted, too conditioned to ever truly fight back. That's when I started recording everything. But what I heard next made me realize their operation was more extensive than I'd imagined. "Now," my father continued, "let's discuss expansion. We've identified 3 potential new properties in the Portland area, all owned by children of existing members who travel frequently for work. They weren't just using my house, they were planning to replicate their business model using other people's homes. My house was a prototype, a test case for a larger operation." A man raised his hand. "What about liability? If something goes wrong at one of these properties, we've incorporated in Delaware," my mother replied smoothly. "Complete legal protection for all parties involved. The homeowners will never be implicated because they have plausible deniability. They genuinely don't know what's happening. They'd thought of everything. Legal protection." What I witnessed next through those cameras would explain the screaming my neighbor had described, but it wasn't what anyone would expect. At midnight, my parents dimmed the lights in my living room and moved the furniture into a large circle. The guests sat down, and my mother brought out what looked like a collection of journals and recording equipment. "Tonight's session will focus on primal release therapy," my father announced. "As always, this is a judgment-free space for authentic, emotional expression." I watched in growing horror as this group of middle-aged professionals, doctors, lawyers, business executives, began what could only be described as adult temper tantrums. They screamed, they cried, they threw pillows around my living room, while my parents encouraged them to release their authentic selves. The screaming my neighbor had heard wasn't from anything sinister, it was from grown adults, paying thousands of dollars to have psychological breakdowns in my house under my parents' guidance. But it got worse. A woman I recognized as a local news anchor began sobbing uncontrollably while describing her childhood trauma of not being allowed to express anger. The man in the expensive suit was rolling around on my carpet, literally throwing a tantrum while my father took notes on a clipboard. "Excellent breakthrough, Richard," my father encouraged. "Your inner child is finally being heard." I realized my parents weren't just running a business, they were running a cult. They'd convinced these wealthy, educated people that paying to scream in a stranger's house was somehow therapeutic and transformative. My mother moved through the group like a therapist, offering what she called emotional coaching, but she had no credentials, no training, no qualifications, beyond convincing desperate people that her made-up therapy sessions were legitimate. Patricia, I want you to visualize your boardroom confidence, my mother was saying to the gray woman. Now channel that energy into rejecting your mother's criticism. Scream it out. Patricia, who I now realized was Patricia Whitman, the CEO of a major Portland corporation, began screaming, "I don't need your approval," over and over, while my mother cheered her on. This explained everything. The cars, the screaming, the money. My parents had created a fake therapy business targeting wealthy professionals who were too embarrassed to seek real help. They were exploiting people's mental health struggles for profit, using my house as their treatment center. But the most disturbing part was how good they were at it. Tonight we have a special session planned, my father announced after the screaming portion ended. Trust falls and vulnerability circles. The group rearranged themselves, and I watched these successful adults participate in summer camp activities, while my parents charged them hundreds of dollars per hour. They did trust falls, they shared secrets in circles, they hugged each other while crying about their authentic selves. It was brilliant in its manipulation. These people were paying for the emotional release they couldn't get in their real lives, and my parents had created an entire mythology around why screaming in someone else's house was therapeutic. But then, I heard something that made me realize the true scope of their deception. Before we continue, my mother said, I want everyone to remember our founding principle. What happens in sacred space, our code name for Sarah's house, allows us to access parts of ourselves that conventional therapy could never reach. Sacred space, they'd given my house a name and built an entire belief system around it. The energy in this house is special, my father continued. Sarah's innocence, her pure heart, her complete trust in us, it creates a protective barrier that allows for true healing. They were using my character, my trust, my supposed pure energy as part of their sales pitch. They'd turned my naivety into a marketing tool. A new woman spoke up, someone I hadn't seen before. Robert, Linda, I want to thank you for accepting me into the sacred space community. After my husband left me and my children stopped speaking to me, I thought I'd never find healing. But these sessions have shown me that I can rebuild my authentic self. Other members shared similar stories: divorces, estranged children, career failures, depression. My parents had targeted vulnerable people and convinced them that paying to have breakdowns in my house would fix their lives. Remember, my mother said as the session continued, conventional therapists want to keep you sick because that's how they make money. We want you healed because healed people create more healing. That's why our model is so much more effective. They were explicitly telling people not to seek real professional help. They were deliberately isolating their clients from legitimate mental health resources. But what happened at 2 a.m. revealed the darkest aspect of their operation. Now, for our advanced practitioners, my father announced, tonight we're offering individual deep trust sessions in Sarah's bedroom. My stomach dropped. Individual sessions in my bedroom. I watched 6 people follow my parents upstairs while the others stayed in the living room for what they called integration time. The bedroom camera showed my parents setting up what looked like a massage table and various props I didn't recognize. Jennifer, you've been working with us for 8 months. My mother said to a woman who looked like she was in her early 50s, I think you're ready for advanced trust work. What followed was the most disturbing abuse of power I'd ever witnessed. They had this vulnerable woman participate in trust exercises that were clearly inappropriate, all while convincing her it was therapeutic. They charged her an additional $500 for the individual session. They rotated through 5 more people over the next 2 hours, each paying extra for what they believed was advanced therapy but was actually psychological manipulation designed to increase their dependence on my parents' services. By 4 a.m., the house was empty except for my parents, who spent an hour carefully cleaning every surface, rearranging furniture, and removing all evidence of what had happened. I watched my mother count a stack of cash that looked like it was at least $15,000 from that single night. Another successful session, my father said as they prepared to leave. I think we can increase our rates again next month. Absolutely, my mother agreed. And Robert, I've been thinking we should start recording some of these breakthrough moments. We could create a documentary about our methods, maybe write a book. They were planning to exploit their victims even further by documenting their vulnerability and selling it as content that as I sat in my hotel room watching my parents lock up my house and drive away, I realized I wasn't just dealing with family betrayal. I was dealing with predators who had used my home as the headquarters for a psychological manipulation scheme targeting vulnerable people. But what I discovered the next day would reveal that their operation was connected to something much larger and more dangerous. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate on my work meetings. All I could think about was those people in my house, paying my parents to exploit their vulnerabilities. But when I started researching sacred space and primal release therapy, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. My parents weren't operating alone. A simple Google search revealed a network of similar operations across the Pacific Northwest, authentic healing circles in Seattle, sacred trust workshops in Vancouver, primal liberation sessions in Spokane, all using the same language, the same methods, the same basic structure my parents had created. I found testimonials on hidden forums, always written in the same breathless, cult-like language about breakthrough healing and authentic self-discovery, but scattered among the praise were disturbing stories from people who'd left these groups. One post made my heart stop. After 18 months in sacred space healing circles, I realized I'd spent $47,000 and alienated my entire family. When I tried to leave, they told me I was resisting my breakthrough and convinced me to take out a second mortgage to pay for intensive healing. I lost my house and almost lost my mind before I realized what they were doing to me. Another post was even more chilling. My elderly mother was targeted by a primal healing group after my father died. They convinced her that her grief was toxic energy that needed to be released through their expensive sessions. She gave them her entire life savings, $180,000, before I found out what was happening. When I confronted the leaders, they had disappeared and changed their business name. My parents weren't just running a scam out of my house. They were part of a larger predatory network targeting vulnerable people across multiple states. I called my office and told them I had a family emergency. Then I spent the rest of the day diving deep into this network, using my consultant skills to trace connections between the different groups. What I found was a sophisticated operation involving at least 12 different healing centers across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. They shared clients, methods, and most disturbing of all, they had a coordinated system for identifying and targeting new victims. The forum posts revealed their strategy. They targeted people going through major life transitions, divorce, death of a spouse, job loss, empty nest syndrome, retirement. They found these people through social media, support groups, even obituaries and divorce filings. But the most shocking discovery came when I found a private Facebook group called Sacred Space Practitioners. It was locked, but I managed to find cached pages that showed member lists and partial conversations. My parents were listed as master practitioners and founding members. In one cached conversation from 3 months ago, my mother had written, "Sarah's house continues to be our most successful location. The trust factor is incredibly high because she genuinely believes we're just house-sitting." Her innocence adds to the sacred energy. Clients consistently report deeper breakthroughs at the sacred space than at any of our other locations. They'd been comparing my house to other locations. This was a franchise operation, and my home was their flagship store. Another cached post from my father made me physically sick. Remember, the key to long-term client retention is creating genuine emotional dependency. They need to believe that our sessions are the only thing keeping them from psychological collapse. Sarah's trusting nature provides the perfect cover. Clients feel safe because they believe they're in a pure space. They'd weaponized my character against vulnerable people. My trustfulness, my innocence, my loving nature. They'd turned those qualities into tools for manipulation. But the post that made me realize the true scope of their crimes came from someone identified as Regional Coordinator Northwest Portland. Sacred Space Linda Robert has exceeded all projections. Q3 revenue, $847,000. Client retention, 94%. Expansion timeline, on track for 5 new locations by end of year. Note, Sarah remains unaware. Continue protection protocols. Almost $1 million in 3 months, just from my house. And they had protection protocols to keep me from finding out. I scrolled through more cached conversations and found detailed discussions about me. They'd analyzed my personality, my work schedule, my relationship patterns. They knew I was conflict-averse, family-oriented, and trusting to a fault. They'd built their entire operation around my psychological profile. One post from my mother was particularly chilling. Sarah would never betray family, even if she discovered everything. We've conditioned her since childhood to prioritize family loyalty over personal grievances. Worst case scenario, she'd demand we stop, but wouldn't report us. Risk level, minimal. They'd been counting on my love for them to protect them from consequences. They'd built a criminal enterprise on the foundation of my emotional programming. But what I found next revealed that their clients weren't their only victims. There was an entire section of the forum dedicated to what they called unwitting hosts, people like me, whose homes were being used without their knowledge. I found at least 8 other cases across the network. A teacher in Seattle, whose parents were using her condo for healing circles while she was at summer camp with students. A nurse in Portland whose brother was running sacred trust sessions in her house during her night shifts. A pilot whose ex-wife was using their shared custody home for primal release workshops when he was flying international routes. All of them had the same profile: trusting, family-oriented, traveled frequently for work, lived alone, had strained but loving relationships with the family members who were exploiting them. The forum discussions revealed that finding unwitting hosts was considered the holy grail of their operation. Using someone else's home provided legal protection, emotional cover, and what they called authentic energy that enhanced their clients' experience. They had recruiters actively searching for potential hosts. They studied people's social media to identify targets. They had detailed protocols for gradually gaining access to homes and building trust with their victims. My case was apparently their most successful example. In the forum, they called me Portland Gold Standard and used my situation as a template for expanding to other cities. But then I found something that made me realize I was in immediate danger. In a conversation dated just 2 weeks ago, someone had posted Portland Gold Standard showing signs of increased awareness, neighbor complaints becoming more frequent. Recommendation: accelerate timeline and prepare exit strategy. My father had responded, agreed. We've extracted maximum value from this location. Suggest transitioning to backup Portland properties within 60 days. Sarah containment protocols, ready, if necessary. Sarah containment protocols. They had a plan for what to do if I discovered their operation. I scrolled frantically through the cached pages until I found the details. My blood turned to ice as I read their contingency plan. If Sarah discovers operation, Phase 1, denial and deflection. Phase 2, guilt manipulation and family pressure. Phase 3, financial leverage. She co-signed Dad's business loan in 2019. Phase 4, medical intervention, history of anxiety, stress-related absences from work. Phase 5, relocation assistance, involuntary if necessary. They were planning to destroy my life if I threatened their operation. They'd use my financial connections to ruin my credit, claim I was having a mental breakdown to undermine my credibility, and ultimately have me committed or relocated. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent 12 hours documenting everything I'd found. Screenshots of the forum posts, recordings from my security cameras, financial records I'd pulled from my bank statements showing unexplained charges that now made perfect sense. They'd been using my utilities, my insurance, even my credit cards for their operation. But most importantly, I discovered they'd made one crucial mistake in their arrogance. They'd scheduled their biggest event yet for the following weekend, a 3-day intensive sacred space retreat at my house. According to the forum posts, they were charging $3,500 per person and expecting 24 participants. It was their grand finale before moving to other locations. They thought I'd be in San Francisco on a consulting job. What they didn't know was that I'd canceled that trip and planned to come home early to install additional security measures. Now, I had a different plan. I called Detective Martinez with the Portland Police Department. I'd found her name through my research. She specialized in financial crimes and had investigated several cases involving fake therapy operations. When I explained what I'd discovered, she was immediately interested. "Ma'am, what you're describing sounds like organized fraud on a multi-state level. We're going to need extensive documentation to build a case. I have recordings, hours of them, audio and video of their planning meetings, their therapy sessions, their financial discussions, everything. Can you get more? Specifically, can you document them taking money from clients?" I looked at my laptop, where the security camera feeds were still running. "Detective, they're planning a major event at my house this weekend. 24 clients, 3 days, over $80,000 in revenue. If I can get inside during the event, absolutely not. That would be too dangerous. We'll coordinate with our task force and detective. With respect, this is my house. They don't know I'm aware of anything. I can walk right in and document everything before they realize what's happening. It took 2 hours of convincing, but she finally agreed to let me be present during their weekend event with backup officers positioned around the neighborhood and a direct line to emergency response. Miss Chen, she said before hanging up, if this goes wrong, if they realize you know what's happening, these people might be dangerous. Are you sure you want to do this? I thought about those forum posts, the containment protocols, the plan to have me committed or relocated if I became a threat. Detective, they've already decided I'm expendable. The only question is whether I fight back or let them destroy me quietly. Friday evening, I parked 3 blocks away from my house and walked through the neighborhood like I was just getting some exercise. Through my neighbors' yards, I could see cars already arriving at my house, expensive vehicles with out-of-state plates, exactly like I'd seen on the security footage. At 9 p.m., I received a text from my mother. Hi, sweetheart. Hope San Francisco is going well. Dad and I are at your house checking on things. See you when you get back. They thought I was 900 miles away. At 10 p.m., I put on dark clothes and approached my house through the backyard. I could hear voices inside, the same breathless, cult-like tone I'd heard through the cameras. Through the kitchen window, I could see my living room packed with people sitting in circles, just like before. But this time, I was going to be more than a remote observer. I used my spare key to enter through the garage. The door opened silently. I'd oiled the hinges that morning before leaving for Portland. The garage was full of clients' luggage and what looked like supplies for a multi-day event. I made my way to the kitchen, staying low and using my phone to record everything. Through the doorway, I could see my father addressing the group. Welcome to Sacred Space Intensive Weekend, he was saying. Over the next 3 days, you'll experience breakthrough healing that conventional therapy could never provide. Each of you has invested $3,500 in your authentic self-discovery journey. I held my phone steady, recording every word. This was the evidence Detective Martinez needed. Clear documentation of them taking money for fake therapy services. My mother stepped forward, holding a clipboard. Before we begin tonight's opening ceremony, please remember that everything discussed here is protected by our Sacred Space Confidentiality Agreement. What happens here, stays here, forever. A woman I recognized from previous footage raised her hand. Linda, I want to thank you for accepting my increased investment. The additional $2,000 for individual healing sessions will be worth it. Individual sessions, they were charging people extra for private manipulation. Of course, Margaret, my mother replied. Your healing journey requires personalized attention. Sarah's bedroom holds especially powerful energy for one-on-one breakthrough work. My stomach turned. They were using my bedroom as their private manipulation chamber and charging premium rates for access. That's when I heard my father say something that made me realize the true scope of tonight's event. Tonight, we have a very special ceremony planned. For those of you who have been with Sacred Space for over a year, you're ready to participate in our Deep Truth Revelation ritual. Deep Truth Revelation, that wasn't something I'd seen in the forum posts. This ceremony will require absolute trust, my mother continued. You'll be asked to share financial information, family secrets, and personal vulnerabilities that you've never shared with anyone. This level of transparency is what separates Sacred Space from ordinary healing. They were conducting some kind of blackmail gathering, getting people to reveal compromising information under the guise of therapy. I crept closer to the living room, staying behind the kitchen island where the shadows would hide me. Through the gap between the counter and the wall, I could see the entire group. Let's begin with Margaret, my father said. Share with the group your deepest financial secret. The woman who'd paid extra for individual sessions stood up, tears already streaming down her face. I embezzled $50,000 from my company's charity fund to pay for my husband's gambling debts. No one knows. The group murmured supportively while my parents took notes. They were documenting felony confessions. Thank you for your courage, Margaret, my mother said. Your truth has been witnessed and will be held in sacred confidence. Sacred confidence. They were collecting blackmail material and calling it therapy. The confessions continued around the room. Tax evasion, insurance fraud, infidelity, abuse of elderly parents, illegal business practices. My parents documented everything while the group created a supportive atmosphere that encouraged deeper revelations. But then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Now, my father announced, it's time for the sacred space leaders to demonstrate ultimate vulnerability. Linda and I want to share our deepest truth with this community. My mother stepped into the center of the circle, and what she said next shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Our deepest secret is that we have a daughter named Sarah, who has no idea that her house is the foundation of our healing ministry. She believes we're simply house-sitting when she travels. The group gasped dramatically, as if this was the most profound revelation imaginable. But here's the deeper truth, my father continued. Sarah's innocence, her pure trust in us, her complete unawareness of our sacred work. That energy is what makes this space so powerful for healing. They were literally selling my naivety as a spiritual commodity. Every month, Sarah unknowingly contributes to the healing of dozens of people, my mother said. Her sacrifice, though she doesn't know she's making it, has transformed lives. But what happens when she finds out? Asked a man from the back of the room. My parents exchanged a look I'd seen before in the forum posts. Sarah will never find out, my father said confidently. We've raised her to prioritize family loyalty above personal concerns. Even if she discovered everything, she'd never truly act against us. And if she did, the man pressed. My mother's smile was cold and calculating. Then we'd help her understand that her mental health has been declining due to work stress. Sometimes, people need professional intervention for their own protection. The room fell silent. They'd just admitted their plan to have me committed if I threatened their operation. That's when someone grabbed my shoulder from behind. Well, look what we have here. I spun around to find a man I'd never seen before standing in my kitchen. Tall, muscular, wearing all black. He looked like private security. Sarah Chen, I presume. His voice was calm but menacing. You're supposed to be in San Francisco. My parents had hired security for their event, and now I was caught. James, my father called from the living room. Is everything all right? We have a situation, the man called back. Sarah's here. The living room went completely silent. Then I heard my parents' footsteps rushing toward the kitchen. When my mother saw me, her face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, a cold calculation that I'd never seen before. Sweetheart, she said in a voice that was nothing like her usual tone. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be working. I canceled my trip, I said, holding up my phone to show I was still recording. I wanted to come home and see what was happening in my house. My father stepped closer, and for the first time in my life, I felt physically afraid of him. Sarah, you need to understand something. You've stumbled into a situation that's much bigger than you can handle. The best thing for everyone, especially you, is to forget what you've seen here tonight. Forget that you're running a criminal operation out of my house. Forget that you're exploiting vulnerable people. Forget that you've been stealing from me for months. My mother laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Stealing. Sarah, we've been improving your house, paying your utilities, even upgrading your belongings. If anything, you owe us. I owe you. I could hear my voice getting higher, but I couldn't control it. You've been charging people thousands of dollars to have psychological breakdowns in my living room. We've been healing people, my father corrected, something you could never understand because you've never grown beyond your selfish, materialistic worldview. The man named James was still standing behind me, blocking my exit. The clients in the living room had gone completely quiet. They were listening to every word. Here's what's going to happen, my mother said, pulling out her phone. You're clearly having some kind of psychological episode. The stress of travel, work pressure, coming home to find family friends here for a spiritual gathering. It's triggered a paranoid break. She was starting to dial a number. I'm calling Dr. Richardson. He's treated you before for anxiety and work-related stress. He'll agree that you need immediate intervention for your own safety. This was it. This was their containment protocol in action. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. Mom, I said loudly, making sure my voice would carry to the living room. Before you make that call, I think everyone here should know something important. I held up my phone and pressed play on the recording I'd made that morning, the cached forum posts, where my parents discussed their clients and their financial projections. My father's voice filled the kitchen. Remember, The key to long-term client retention is creating genuine emotional dependency. They need to believe that our sessions are the only thing keeping them from psychological collapse. The silence from the living room was deafening. Then my mother's voice played back. Sarah would never betray family, even if she discovered everything. We've conditioned her since childhood to prioritize family loyalty over personal grievances. Worst case scenario, she'd demand we stop but wouldn't report us. Risk level, minimal. I heard movement from the living room, people standing up, whispering, some of them heading toward the front door. Sarah, my father said quietly, you have no idea what you've just done. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Police sirens in the distance. Getting closer, Detective Martinez hadn't trusted me to handle this alone after all. Within minutes, my house was surrounded by police cars. Detective Martinez led a team of officers through my front door while the clients scattered in panic. Some trying to climb over my back fence, others hiding in my bathroom. Portland police. Everyone remained calm and stay where you are. The man named James tried to run but was tackled in my hallway by 2 officers. My parents stood frozen in my kitchen, finally understanding that their operation was over. Sarah Chen, Detective Martinez found me still holding my phone with the recording playing. Are you all right? I'm okay. I got everything. The confessions, the financial details, all of it. Over the next 6 hours, I watched my house become a crime scene. Officers documented everything, the fake therapy setup, the financial records my parents had left on my dining room table, the client files with detailed psychological profiles and payment histories. 20-4 people were arrested that night. My parents were charged with fraud, operating without a license, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The clients who had confessed to crimes during the Deep Truth Revelation ceremony were facing additional charges based on their own admissions. But the most shocking discovery came when police searched my parents' car. They found files on 4 other potential unwitting hosts across 6 states, names, addresses, work schedules, psychological profiles, family relationship assessments. My case hadn't been unique, it was just the most successful example of a much larger operation. Miss Chen, Detective Martinez said as the last of the arrests were being processed, your parents were part of a network that's been operating for at least 5 years. We've identified over 200 victims across the Pacific Northwest, with total damages exceeding $12 million. $12 million. Extracted from vulnerable people seeking genuine help for their emotional pain. What happens now? Your parents are looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The network is being investigated by multiple agencies, and you, double quotes, she paused. You're going to need to rebuild your entire life. She was right. Over the following weeks, the full scope of the damage became clear. My house had been so thoroughly contaminated by their activities that I couldn't bear to live there anymore. Every room held memories of strangers exploiting vulnerable people while my parents counted cash. I put it on the market and sold it within a month, taking a significant loss just to escape. My relationship with my extended family was destroyed. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had initially been supportive turned against me when the media coverage began. Headlines like "Daughter Exposes Parents Cult Operation" and "Family Betrayal Leads to Massive Fraud Bust" made me a pariah at family gatherings. I was no longer invited to anyway. The worst part was discovering how many people had known about my parents' activities but had said nothing. My sister admitted she'd been taking money from them for years, but claimed she didn't know where it came from. My uncle revealed that he'd helped them set up their business structure, but insisted he thought it was legitimate. Everyone knew something was off. My cousin told me during one of our last conversations, "But Sarah, they're family. We don't destroy family." That's when I realized the deepest truth about this entire experience. My family's belief system hadn't been about love or loyalty, it had been about protecting the people who caused harm, rather than the people who suffered from it. The trials lasted 18 months. I testified against my parents in federal court, describing how they'd manipulated my trust and violated my home. The hardest part wasn't facing them. It was facing the victims. Margaret, the woman who'd confessed to embezzling charity funds, approached me during a court recess. She was in her 50s. Well-dressed and looked like someone who had her life together, but her eyes held a haunted quality I recognized from my own mirror. "Sarah, I want you to know that your parents saved my life," she said quietly. I stared at her. "They exploited you. They took your money and recorded your confessions. But before that, I was planning to kill myself." I'd stolen money, my marriage was falling apart, and I saw no way out. Your parents gave me hope. They made me believe I could heal. That conversation haunted me for months. Because even though my parents were criminals, even though they'd built their operation on lies and manipulation, some of their victims genuinely believed they'd been helped. The psychological evaluation I underwent as part of the legal process revealed something disturbing. My parents had been conditioning me since childhood to be the perfect victim, the sharing philosophy, the family loyalty expectations, the guilt when I prioritized my own needs. It had all been preparation for eventual exploitation. Your parents didn't suddenly become criminals, the psychologist explained. They'd been practicing manipulation techniques on you for decades. Your house was just the logical next step, but the most difficult revelation came during my mother's sentencing hearing. She was given the opportunity to address the court before receiving her sentence. I expected an apology, an explanation, maybe even a moment of genuine remorse. Instead, she looked directly at me and said, "Your Honor, my daughter has destroyed our family over her inability to understand that sometimes love requires sacrifice. I hope someday she learns that betraying family is the greatest crime of all." Even facing 20 years in federal prison, she still believed I was the villain in this story. My father's statement was shorter but equally chilling. "Sarah, we gave you a purpose bigger than your small life. You threw it away for your own selfishness." They received 18 and 16 years respectively. They'll be in their 70s when they're released, if they survived that long. I moved to a different state, changed my name legally, and started over. I kept my consulting business but shifted to helping organizations identify and prevent fraud. Work that felt like putting my trauma to productive use. The house I live in now is smaller, simpler, and completely secure. No one has keys except me. I don't travel as much for work, and when I do, I use a house-sitting service with verified background checks. But the hardest part of rebuilding wasn't the practical aspects. It was learning to trust again. For months after the trials ended, I jumped at every unexpected sound. I installed cameras everywhere, checked locks obsessively, and avoided forming close relationships because I couldn't distinguish between genuine care and potential exploitation. Therapy helped, but it took a specific kind of therapist, one who specialized in family betrayal and cult recovery, because that's what my parents had created, a family-based cult with me as the unwitting centerpiece. The deepest abuse, my therapist explained, happens when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who harm you. Your recovery isn't just about healing from betrayal. It's about learning to trust your own perceptions when the people who taught you to perceive the world were actively distorting reality. It's been 3 years now since that night in my kitchen. I still have bad days when I wonder if I overreacted, if I destroyed my family over something that could have been resolved quietly. But then, I remember Margaret and the other victims. I remember the forum posts describing their expansion plans. I remember my mother calmly discussing having me committed if I became inconvenient. And I remember that choosing myself over family loyalty wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Built a new life now, with friends who respect boundaries, and a romantic partner who understands why I need transparency in all things. I still struggle with trust, but I'm learning that healthy relationships feel completely different from the manipulation I grew up thinking was love. The strangest part is that I sleep better now than I have in years. Even though I live alone, even though I'm estranged from most of my family, even though my life looks nothing like what I planned, I finally feel safe, because the house I live in now belongs to me completely. No one is using it without my knowledge. No one is profiting from my trust. No one is planning my destruction while pretending to love me. Sometimes people ask if I miss my parents. The honest answer is complicated. I miss the parents, I thought. I had the ones who were simply house-sitting and being a little too helpful with my cleaning. I missed the fantasy of family that included people who genuinely cared about my well-being. But do I miss Robert and Linda Chen, the criminal masterminds who built a multi-million-dollar fraud operation using my home as headquarters? Do I miss the people who planned to have me committed if I discovered their crimes? No, I don't miss them at all. Reflection. The hardest lesson I learned from this experience isn't that family can betray you. It's that love and manipulation can look identical, until you're brave enough to examine them closely. For 32 years, I believed my parents' excessive interest in my life was love. Their need to know my schedule, their insistence on having access to my space, their guilt when I tried to establish boundaries. I thought these were signs of caring, but love doesn't require access to exploit you. Love doesn't study your weaknesses to use against you later. Love doesn't build contingency plans for your destruction. What my parents called love was actually a long-term investment strategy with me as the unwitting asset. The most insidious part of familial abuse is how it warps your understanding of normal relationships. I spent decades thinking that real love meant sacrificing your own needs, that loyalty meant ignoring red flags, that family meant never saying no. Now I understand that healthy love actually protects your autonomy rather than exploiting it. Real family respects your boundaries rather than constantly testing them. True loyalty flows both ways rather than flowing only upward to protect the people with power. I used to think my parents' greatest crime was the fraud operation. Now I realize their greatest crime was teaching me that my value came from what I could provide to others rather than who I was as a person. Recovery meant learning to see myself as someone worthy of protection rather than exploitation. It meant recognizing that my kindness, my trust, my willingness to help, these weren't character flaws that made me vulnerable. They were strengths that deserved to be honored rather than abused. The question that haunts me isn't whether I made the right choice in exposing them. It's how many other families are operating similar systems right now, with children who haven't yet realized they're being used. How many people are living in houses that aren't really theirs? How many are being conditioned to prioritize others' needs over their own survival? How many are being taught that questioning family authority is the ultimate betrayal? So here's my question for you. Is there someone in your life who demands access but never offers transparency? Someone who calls your boundaries selfish but never respects them? Someone who makes you feel guilty for protecting yourself but never protects you in return? What would happen if you started treating your own well-being as seriously as you treat theirs? If this story opened your eyes to the darker side of family manipulation, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Share your own experiences with toxic family dynamics in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our stories helps others recognize they're not alone. Remember, choosing yourself isn't betrayal. Sometimes it's the only way to survive. And thank you for listening to the hardest story I've ever had to tell.